we go. So good morning, everyone. It is now time to start our 2-day-long journey together in a workshop where various Finnish experts and key stakeholders are sharing for you, our church and guests, how the current Finnish national policies for internationalization of higher education and research were constructed, what Finland aims to achieve with the policies, and how the implementation and follow-up work has been organized. My name is Sofia Lähdeniemi, and I come from the Finnish National Agency of Education, EDUFI, from the unit of International Higher Education Cooperation. And we are here today because Liika Klonti, the head of National Erasmus Plus office in Georgia, contacted EDUFI, which amongst its other various tasks also operates as the national agency for Erasmus Plus program. And Liika was asking if we could share the story behind the current Finnish policies for internationalization of higher education. In our response to Liika, though, we had to tell her that we at EDUFI unfortunately could not, as when it comes to the national strategies and steering of higher education, it is a matter that is the responsibility of our Ministry of Education and Culture. However, as EDUFI, just like many other stakeholders in the field of higher education in Finland, has been involved in the process of formulating the current policies, we were happy to initiate the request further, and together with colleagues from the ministry, especially the senior ministerial advisor Tiina Vihma-Purovaara, we built up the program for this workshop. And I must say at this point that EDUFI colleagues, Senior Program Advisor Sini Piippo and Program Manager Kenneth Lundin, are to be thanked for taking a very active role in planning and preparing the program together with Liika Klonti for this workshop. So both today and also tomorrow, I will be acting as a host and a chair for this workshop. And as the program proceeds, I will present each speaker in detail. Yet, I'd like to say a few words about the program as a whole. So today, the aim is that we present for you a comprehensive overlook and introduction to the current Finnish higher education and research policies. Yet, we felt that it is very important to give an overview of the Finnish education system as well as the higher education system, and therefore, in session 1 this morning, the Senior Ministerial Advisor Tomi Halonen from the Ministry of Education and Culture will give an introduction to the Finnish education system and how the funding and steering system, especially for higher education and research, works. After that, Councillor of Education Juha Ketolainen from EDUFI, on the other hand, will tell you about the internationalization of Finnish higher education, letting you know about the journey and important steps of internationalization of Finnish higher education along the years. And then after lunch break today, in the afternoon, we move on to the policies to promote internationalization in Finnish higher education and research, with Senior Ministerial Advisor Tiina Vihma-Purovaara from the Ministry presenting the background and the process towards the policies, also presenting then the strategy itself and the implementation plan that supports the policies. That will be for today, and then what comes tomorrow, we will take a look how continuous development work, the monitoring and evaluation of the policies has taken place and is taking place in the Forum for Internationalization in Finnish Higher Education and Research. And in addition, tomorrow you will also hear how the various stakeholders in the field of higher education in Finland have been involved in building and implementing the policies. This in short, and at this point I would just like to say that on behalf of all of us Finnish organizers, I would like to welcome all of you very warmly to this workshop. And next, I will give the floor to Liika Klonti, the head of National Erasmus Office in Georgia. Please, Liika.
Thank you very much, Sophia. I have to start with thanking the organizers for this exceptional opportunity, because we all done this kind of seminars and we know how much work stuck behind it, organizing this type of two-day webinars and mobilizing all the speakers, especially from the ministries of education and science, because people are usually very busy there. So I'm exceptionally thankful and grateful for you, to you for this effort. My special thanks goes to Sini, Sophia, and Kenneth, who are behind all this organizational work. And for the attention of Georgian participants, I want to underline that all this seminar is organized absolutely for free. So this is a gift of Finnish colleagues to us, and I hope that we will use it for good purposes here, and we will have it. So thank you very, very much. And I do hope that we will be able to invite you to Georgia and to reciprocate somehow this type of collaboration. To give you a context, so why we have actually this idea to organizing this webinar. As you know, as you're aware, right now there is a group of experts developing a 10-year strategy of education and research in Georgia. So I'm glad to see that experts have joined us and are also attending this seminar. So, and this 10-year strategy of higher education and research will be accompanied by action plan, by budget, by persons in charge, etc. So it will be kind of serious strategy and not a wish list as we've seen, unfortunately, in the past. As a National Erasmus Plus office, we are specifically interested in the international components of higher education and research development in Georgia, and we believe that we are also competent enough, together with our experts pools, to provide recommendations. So when we were looking for European experience for inspiration, we saw that there are very few countries in Europe who have explicit strategy at the national level for internationalization of higher education and research, and Finland is one of them, and actually one of the most successful. So we have today this specific opportunity to share Finnish experience, and for these 2 days we will be hearing how Finland has planned and already implemented the strategy of internationalization in higher education and research. Of course, we are aware that we cannot copy and paste Finnish approaches because countries are too different. But what would be for me the main takeover from this seminar is experience. And I hope that we are able to translate this experience into the Georgian context and use this information, this data, and these approaches also for our own strategy here in our country. The strategy has to be developed by September, and of course universities have to implement it also, so not only ministry in charge. I'm glad to see that today we have representatives of Rustaveli Science Foundation, because we will be talking also about the research internationalization. We have here Quality Assurance Agency, the ministry will be joining us. Of course, we know that people are busy and people will be coming into the seminar and going out, but we will have the recording and presentation, so you will be able to catch up later. I hope that we will use the question and answer sessions and get more information from our colleagues here. And I have nothing to say more than to thank again our Finnish colleagues for being so generous to us and for providing us this wonderful opportunity of sharing experience. Thank you very much. And now we all go on mute, and we can also switch off our cameras actually and to have more working modus. Thank you, Sophia, again. Thank you.
Thank you, Liika. And as Liika was saying, we will have these question and answer sessions after each speaker. And just to clarify that we have agreed that in the question and answer part, Liika will be the one who picks up the questions from the chat box where you can write them. And this we found a good way to proceed, as we find that, of course, choosing the most relevant questions for the Georgian context, Liika is the best person to do that, as you know, for example, in case we find that the time is limited, you have the ability to pick up the most important questions to be answered. This in short, and we have a few minutes left before our Director General from the Ministry of Education and Culture will officially open up this workshop. But as we have a few moments, this is a good time to ask if everything is clear for all of you participants, or should something be clarified?
I think everything's working fine.
Perfect. And I think that, as we know, usually the Director Generals, they are very busy people, so we assume Atte will be joining us, Atte Jääskeläinen will be joining us very promptly. So we have a few minutes now for everyone to perhaps fill up their coffee cup or take a glass of water, and we start very promptly at 9:30. And yes, here we go. There we have now our Director General of the Ministry of Education and Culture, Mr. Atte Jääskeläinen. And as Atte's presentation is there and he is present himself, I believe it is all good to start off with your presentation. Welcome, Atte.
Thank you, Sofia. And could you please remind me about the time frame? How much time do I have?
Gladly. In total, you have 30 minutes, but it would be very nice if there are some time left in the end of your, or at the end of your presentation, for some questions from our Georgian audience.
Thank you, Sofia, and dear guests and distinguished audience. It's a great honor for me to have this opportunity to present to you and explain you some of the basics of our higher education and research policies. And I will try to keep this as interactive as possible, and I would very much welcome all your questions and comments. So please don't hesitate to write your comments on the chat whenever you have anything in your mind, and I will try to comment them. And then after I will try to keep this quite short. So I will open this for a discussion. Sofia, is it possible for me to change the slides, or do you have to do it?
You should be able to take over the presentation.
Did it change? Did it change? Yes. Okay.
Yes.
So of course, all policies in Finland are based on the government's program, and we have 4-year terms in our parliament. And in normal circumstances, the governments nowadays, they typically sit the whole parliamentary term. So normally the government is in office for 4 years. Well, in the recent years, quite often the prime minister has resigned for one reason or another. So the name of the government may change when the prime minister changes. And that typically is as a result of a process in which the largest party changes their chairman for a reason or another. So Prime Minister Sanna Marin is in office now, but this is very much based on the former Prime Minister Antti Rinne's program that was agreed on December 2019. And I would say that in this program, there are very many targets or objectives or policy lines that were prepared together with Finnish higher education institutes. And that is based on our culture of designing policies in this field together with the institutions, especially the rectors and principles of universities and universities of applied sciences. So what is the system with which the government discusses and which also takes care of fulfilling these policies?
I'm very sorry to interrupt you, but I will do this right in the beginning. It looks that so far you did not yet take control over the presentation.
Okay.
I can gladly switch the slides for you, but
okay.
At the top of the,
All right.
the screen there is the take over button.
All right. All right. Yes. So I hope that you now see the slide which is about the website of the government's program. Is that correct? So the slide number 2. So not the title slide.
So far not, but do you mind if I just?
Okay, if you do it, yeah. So if you show shortly the second slide, and then I'm already on the third slide.
Now it's the third slide.
Okay, so you should see a white map of Finland with some numbers around it. So we have in our higher education system, we have 14 universities. Most of them are state institutions, but some of them are established as foundations. But both of them are independent. So they are autonomous in their administration and in theory on their finances as well, although quite large share of their financing comes from the state. But the idea is that, and the kind of central key idea behind this autonomous governance is that universities are expected to fulfill their purposes based on their understanding of academic freedom and the kind of freedom of higher education and freedom of research that is guaranteed in the Finnish constitution. And of course, you can ask whether it's kind of a sensible or not, but it's a kind of a very kind of fundamental principle in Finland that we believe that these institutions fulfill their mission for the society and they serve the society best if they are given this autonomy. It's almost like monetary policy, which is given to the central banks. And although at some times their policies may not feel the best possible, then it's kind of a strategic decision that it's better that they make the decisions on the interest rates rather than the governments, because in the long term this brings you better results. So 14 universities. We also have universities of applied sciences, meaning that they are typically smaller and they are more inclined to the needs of the labor market and also to the regional needs. So their grades are a more kind of profession oriented, and they typically have lots of practical work in their education curriculum, and half of the students actually study in the universities of applied sciences of those in higher education in total. So half of the students in universities, half of the students in universities of applied sciences. Universities do a lot of research and innovation work, and a much higher share of their income comes from research. So universities of applied sciences are, I would say, 80% directed to educating people through the labor market. Universities are actually a little bit more research institutes than higher education institutes, if you kind of define that based on the funding they receive. And then we have some research institutes, most of them government run, and that brings these numbers, close to 2,000 doctoral degrees a year and 15,000 master degrees, and then the degrees from universities of applied sciences should be actually added in that figure as well. So our research and development spending is quite high. We are ranked somewhere between 5, 6, 7 in industrialized nations compared to the size of the country. But the government's objective is to increase the ratio of R&D spending from the present 2.8% of GDP to 4%, which is very ambitious target. Some people would say that it's unrealistic even, but that's how it is. And to make it realistic, it's only possible through private sector investments in research and development. And the public sector's role in that development is to incentivize those private sector investments. And we believe that if we can design our research and innovation system in a way that it creates a good environment for businesses to invest in R&D, then this kind of amplifies the level of R&D spending on the level of the whole nation. And then next slide, please. So actually, again, a slide that explains the system. So universities of applied sciences, research institutes, and then quite important players in the field are university hospitals as well, because they provide the clinical environment in which the medical research is done. And they, of course, they also provide the highest quality level and the kind of have most extreme care also. And then, of course, we have private sectors investment in R&D, and they also have some research institute. And the next slide, please. If we look at the policies of this field in the I would say last decade, one key decision was the reform of universities that happened a little bit more than 10 years ago, and that was the phase in which this autonomy for universities was very much strengthened. So the idea was, well, just to give you some examples, the professors were appointed by the President of the Republic, meaning that every appointment of a professor previously was a very, very kind of a high level decision, not typically a political decision, but made by a political actor. And through giving this autonomy to universities, they were given full freedom of choosing their personnel. They were given full freedom of running their operations, and also the funding system for university was based on incentives and results. Finland has a funding system, public funding system for universities that is very much based on how much the universities are able to deliver. How many master's degrees do you produce? Every master's degree means a certain sum of money for the university. How much research do you produce? What quality is that research? And we have a classification system in Finland for research quality based on the papers quality, and they are very carefully calculated, and money is delivered to the institutions based on the output. Then we had research institutes that were reformed in 2013, and then the universities of applied sciences were reformed, and they were also given much more independence. They are typically private limited companies by law, but of course mostly owned by public bodies. Quite often nowadays, the owners are universities. So the universities and universities of applied sciences, they form groups. For example, one university may own even two universities of applied sciences in different cities, and therefore kind of divide their roles so that the university is the more research-oriented institution, and then the University of Applied Sciences are more oriented to fulfilling the labor needs of their region. And of course, both of them are specializing on their strengths. And then 2017, we created a new vision for whole higher education and research in Finland, which was one of the key documents that on which the government's program was written in 2019. And the story continues. More policy papers are produced based on this basic work that was done then. And the next slide, please. So, as I said, academic freedom is very strong and strongly supported in Finland and secured through a special paragraph in Constitution. And that means that their administrative autonomy is in reality very high, and financially they are expected to bring the results, but of course they are very much dependent on public funding. So the Finnish system is it's more relies more on public funding than many other countries, but the public funding comes from the results. So it's in a way it's an institution that is responsible of bringing these results and gets paid for them. And one of the key guidelines or decisions that was done in 2017 is that we aim at much higher international kind of capability and networking, a system in which Finnish higher education institutions are heavily networked globally, and we believe that brings them the ability to raise their quality to a new level. So that's a kind of a strategic objective, that the quality increases, and the means to increase the quality is to promote internationalization of both research and education. And we also believe that the Finnish higher education institutes are not big enough alone in the global arena, so we promote their collaboration, working together, making choices on which each institution focuses, and they should focus on their strategic strengths. Next slide, please. Okay, that was it. That was the basic presentation of how. And I believe that we have some 10 minutes now for your questions and comments, and I would be happy to answer. So please raise your hands or post your comments in the chat. Sofia, you can break the ice and ask about the issues I forgot. Okay.
There is actually a question. Can you read it straight away? Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Fair and effective spending of public funds. That's a very interesting question, because that's not the main approach to using public funds in higher education. We are not following carefully every detail. We deliver enormous amount of money, which is labeled as basic funding, and the basic funding is delivered not based on how it's used, but based on what results are kind of brought by the institution. Of course, it has a delay. If you invest in the research today, you get the results after 5 or 10 years. Kind of creating high competence in one area takes a lot of time in research. In education, you get the master's degrees. After launching a program, takes 2 years to start it, then you spend 4 or 5 years in the program, and then the statistics are ready after 2 years after graduation. So you actually get paid almost 10 years later after you have made the decision to expand kind of this program, this master's program. But anyway, this is how the system works. Of course, we have regulations how public money should be used, and of course you shouldn't break those rules, and they have their internal audits. But from the government's perspective, we are more interested on the results than how every single euro is used, except when it's given to a special purpose. And we have funding schemes for that. Okay, we want you to take care of the well-being of students. And we just recently distributed 6 million euros for this special purpose. There were applications, and in the applications, they explain how they will spend the money. And then they will explain and report, was it spent, how it was supposed to spend. And quite often this kind of money actually is paid back because all of the money was not used for that purpose. But that's a very small portion of funding compared to the basic funding, which is based more on the results than how in detail the money is spent. Accountability, I would almost repeat the same. The accountability is more on the side of the results. But then, of course, there is this aspect that if the institutions are autonomous, if you are independent, can you do whatever you want? And then we have two kind of baskets, and first of them is the academic academic culture of getting merit. So the first accountability comes from the system of the international system of how you become a respected academic and how are you promoted. That means that you have to publish high quality research, and through that the incentive system actually promotes high quality research. There is also measures of the quality of education, which is reflected on the institution's funding, and that of course creates a culture in which the organizations should strive for higher quality, because it's for the benefit for the whole institution, for the individual, and it also gives you some financial benefits. But then we have also one part of the basic funding which is called strategic funding, and that part of funding is based on either the institution's own strategy or the government's policy. And for example, the government's policy has been to promote internationalization of these institutes and to increase the number of students in master's programs. So this money has been delivered based on how they promise to fulfill these targets. So there is a policy component in the funding scheme, and the funding scheme is very much used in kind of making the institutions to act in the way that is desired on the policy level. There is a very comprehensive data collecting system. So we have creating statistics on which this money is delivered, and yes, these statistics sometimes can be quite kind of definitive in how much money you earn, and sometimes we also have to kind of review that whether the statistics are correct or not, because it may have kind of a substantial financial implications whether there is a mistake or not. Performance-based funding, yes, we do have it, and it's not 100% performance-based, but it's one of the most performance-based funding schemes in the world. And there are international comparisons on this, for example, done by OECD, and there Finland is ranked as one of the countries with highest share of that kind of funding. Yes, Tommy, who is present, has been also involved in this quite amazing Vipunen database, which is kind of a interesting name. It's in Finnish and means some kind of a small tool with which you can move heavy things. Actually, research productivity is more evaluated through published articles and books, and master's degrees are a measure of output of education. So there are these kind of two basic baskets: education, meaning mostly master's degrees, but also doctorate degrees. You get paid for doctorate degrees as well as an institution. But then research output is the second important pillar. Inflation of the degrees, yes, it's a zero-sum game. It means that if every institution increases their output, then the price of every single item decreases. But on the systemic level, that's actually something that is desired. Of course, there is then discussion whether the quality decreases if the unit price decreases, but that's how it works. And we have ceilings, so for the number of degrees. So there is a certain limit after which you don't anymore get paid for master's degrees, for example. So that is the way how we regulate that. We raised those levels quite substantially in the recent round, and that was because we believe that the country benefits from higher numbers of degrees produced, because we want to increase the share of people that have university degrees. Okay, I think I tried to answer the questions that were in chat. Nobody raised their hands, so we only got questions that were in writing, but I believe that this was actually quite effective way of posing questions, and I tried to answer them. So Sofia, back to you.
Thank you very much, Atte Jääskeläinen, both for this very interesting and comprehensive presentation. And as for the questions in the chat box, I think they were quite comprehensively also answered already. But just for you to know, as Tomi Halonen was already commenting, that some of the issues will be touched upon more in detail throughout today and tomorrow. For example, the Vipunen system, and also more details on the funding models of higher education in Finland. But at this point, we thank you very much, Director General Atte Jääskeläinen, for having time and taking time for this workshop, and we hope that you enjoy the rest of the day. Thank you.
I hope that you enjoy as well, and have a great day. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Great. And then it is time for us to move on, and we already have here on the screen Tomi Halonen, or at least he was there. Yes, there you are.
Yeah.
Yes, great. So we have here the Senior Ministerial Advisor, Tomi Halonen, from the Ministry of Education and Culture. And as presented in the beginning of today, while introducing the program for you, Tomi will now give an introduction, a thorough introduction to the Finnish education system and how especially the funding and steering system of higher education and research works. So Tomi will now go more in detail after Atte's interesting presentation. So after further ado, I think Tommy, please go ahead.
Yeah, thank you, Sophia. I'm glad to have you, dear guests. Glad to have you here. It is nice to be talking about international context for a while, because this Corona year has been a little bit different than usual, you could say. So it's really nice to be here discussing about these issues. Just for the first question, I will ask the same question that Atte did, that how long do I have time for the presentation and how much we should leave for the discussion. So I think I have two parts. We might take some of the part of the discussion also in the middle before the funding and steering for the education system, but approximately how long? Sorry, your microphone is muted.
Indeed, thank you. So for the session 1 in total, we have reserved 90 minutes, but it includes, in addition to your presentation, also the presentation of Juha Ketolainen. So approximately it means that 75 minutes per each gentleman in this session, and it is very much up to you to decide on how to use it. So if you feel that it is a good way to take questions in between, we can just invite people to take them in the chat box, and you can follow the chat box and take them at good moments when you see they flow in naturally to your presentation, but also reserve perhaps some time at the end of the presentation. Would that be good?
Yeah, thank you.
Great.
Okay, I hope I can now control the presentation. Does it change in your view also? No, I don't think actually. Okay, but you can also, if you can't give me the control, you can also move forward in this. I think it's on the Finnish computer now. Yeah.
It's now changing nicely. If you took control, perhaps.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I moved to the next slide. Can you see it?
Yeah, you can see
okay.
it. So
okay, that's good.
Sorry to interfere. I think that you can change the slides or kind of browse the presentation also as a participant, but you could take over. Do you see that? You should click take over,
yeah.
or I can change the slide. Okay, now it's
now I saw it.
Okay.
Yes.
It's changed.
Okay.
Sorry.
Now I hope it can be seen properly. Yes.
It's good.
Yeah. Okay, that's good. Okay, first few words about our system, our country, our site in that sense, and in our educational levels. I think Atte covered most of the actually of some of the basic issues, but our system is built very much on the and Finnish society is built very much on education and research. And we do have actually quite good education levels, so that it's almost 90% that hold least upper secondary education degree, and it's something like 42% that hold a higher education degree in Finland. And Atte mentioned already that this is something that we are aim to rise even further because in the international comparison, there we have been. Our relative performance have been basically deteriorating in the last decade. So this is something we are actually improving right now. We do have 2 official languages. We have a majority speaks Finnish, but we also have another official language which is Swedish, and therefore we have some Swedish-speaking institutions also in our higher education system, and of course in also the vocational education system and in the basic education. And so basically our education understanding, our education system is very heavily based on equity issues. It is actually said in the Constitution that everyone has right to basic education free of charge. This actually applies to our whole education system in the sense that for domestic students and students coming from European Union area or European Economic Area, it is education based leading to a degree is free of charge. And it is very much built on this kind of equal opportunities to receive many kind of educational services according to everyone's ability and needs, and give the possibility basically to develop themselves also in the field of education. Basically, our education system is very much very much characterized by these kind of issues. I mentioned already the free education on all levels. But one of the important issues is actually that our system is designed to be flexible. I will return to this in my next slide, because this is very important design principle basically of our higher education, of our whole education system. We do have very highly respected and trained teachers. Most of our teachers actually in basic education, it's required that they have a master's degree from the universities, and our vocational education teachers are actually trained in the universities of applied sciences. So it's one of the principles is that our teachers are trained, and actually they are very well respected in society also. It's very much wanted profession in Finland to become a teacher. There are many applicants to teacher training programs every year. We do not have really much standardized testing or ranking in our schools. Our only standardized testing is actually matriculation examination at the end of the general upper secondary education. And this is actually now used very much as the entrance requirement or entrance selection criteria to higher education. It is very much a decentralized system on all levels, basically, in that sense that many of the decisions are done in the local level or in the municipal level or in the institutional level, little bit depending on the what education level we are actually talking about. And it's very much based on trust, actually, the whole education system. This is really important issue. It's not based on that kind of any kind of control, but it's based on the trust the education system. So there's actually great level of autonomy in all the education field. So in our education system, I hope you can see this properly. It might be somewhat small, but I hope you can read about it. Basically, our education system, as I mentioned, is designed in a way that there are no dead ends. It starts with the early childhood education and care, which is basically done at those early childhood education units. Then we have this pre-primary education, which starts when the kids are 6 years old. It's actually experimented now that in some municipalities it starts already on when the children turn 5 years. But it's experiment, and we'll see about the results whether we are going to continue this or what are the results from that experiment. So, but everyone goes to pre-primary education at the age of 6. And it's done. It's given mostly at the early childhood education units, but in some cases also the schools provide pre-primary education. So it can be either way. Our basic education starts at comprehensive schools at years when the children turn 7 that year, and it lasts for the following 9 years. Our basic education. Then you have you choose whether you go to the general upper secondary education or whether you go to the vocational education. General upper secondary schools end at the matriculation examination, and vocational education qualification, the basic qualification are given in the vocational institutes, but then there are also possibilities to have this kind of special vocational qualification, further qualification, and also initial vocational qualifications. But actually, after basic education, the basic route is to the basic vocational qualification. And it is possible to move to higher education either way. It is designed to be open-ended system in that way that from vocational qualification you can enter to universities. This is not really the typical way. It's only some few percent of the students, university students who come from the vocational education, but that route very much exists. But it's very typical actually go to the universities of applied sciences from the vocational qualification. We do have it's somewhere between 40 or 50% for the new students in universities of applied sciences who actually come through the vocational route to the higher education. So it's commonplace. Of course, after vocational qualification, majority goes to the working life, but from the University of Applied Sciences perspective, it is between 40 and 50% who come from the vocational route. So it's very, very much reality this possibility to go to the higher education. Main degree at universities is master's degree. Actually, it means that when students comes to study the bachelor's degree, they are given at the same time the right to study all the way to master's degree. There are some minor exceptions in the education system, but mostly it's master's degree is the main degree. For the Universities of Applied Sciences, it is actually the bachelor's degree is the main degree, after which typical way of leaving is leave to a working life. But there is also possibility to go to study master's degrees at Universities of Applied Sciences, but this actually requires 2 years of work experience. So this is kind of more adult education that is given there, and it's quite typical actually that it is done after quite many years in the working life. But it gives great possibility to have this kind of continuing education at the Universities of Applied Sciences, very practice oriented fields and education in the Universities of Applied Sciences. Doctoral degrees and also minor number of licentiate degrees are awarded only at the universities. So Universities of Applied Sciences do not award doctors. And basically all this education system for Finnish and domestic and actually students coming from European Union, European education area, European Union area are actually free of charge, leading their degree. Then of course we have quite a lot of different kind of other kind of education. We do have liberal adult education, different kind of adult education centers, folk high schools, summer universities, this kind of education there. For some reason, actually, I cannot see my presentation now. Do you know what happened?
Indeed, I have the same thing. Sini, as you are operating with the presentations, perhaps you are more skilled to quickly bring back the presentation.
I can actually, of course, show it from my computer also if there's some problem.
But it should come up again, so that if you take over again, so I hope it's fine now.
It's at least visible here.
Yeah,
yes.
Yeah, I can see it. Yes, thank you. So we do have this different kind of additional education, and of course we do have quite a many kind of open university education, which is subsidized, but it's cost a little bit to the student, and also there are some kind of there are many kind of continuing education that actually the universities and Universities of Applied Sciences give. Basically on the market pricing, in that sense that it's not anyhow subsidized in our system. So it's very you can actually say it's very diverse package that's actually given education in Finland. But this chart shows really the basic education system, how it works. So this is our education system, and in the center it's all the education that leads to a degree, which is basically the main part of the education. But continuing education is actually something that we are very much trying to develop today, because we have seen the really rising need for this kind of continuing education in Finnish system, because people in working life need new skills. So we need to enhance that side also, that people should have possibilities to develop their expertise in while being in working life also. And of course there are many kind of needs to, for example, to change profession or this kind of issues. So it should be improved also in the future. Some words about our education level. I already mentioned at the beginning that where we stand. We do have quite well educated population. People who at least have upper secondary vocational qualification, meaning that they have vocational qualification or higher education qualification. That's something that lies between the 80 or 90%. So in the little bit older population, one of our issues is actually seen here, that our university and University of Applied Science graduates tend to graduate little old. That's the reason why actually this 24, 25, 26 years old it's so clearly lower when it comes to the education level. And where we stand internationally in our system, This shows actually very well that we do have quite a lot of education in our population, meaning people who have tertiary education or at least some kind of upper secondary or post-secondary education. And actually this higher education level is something that, as Atte mentioned, we are really much trying to develop to move us basically further in this kind of comparison to aim for that 50% of for educational attainment on the tertiary education. Perhaps some words about the areal distribution of universities and universities of applied sciences. They are quite evenly dispersed around the country, basically where the population is. The northern parts of Finland is very sparsely populated, so there are not many institutions, but still there are higher education institutions, both universities and universities of applied sciences also there. Actually the both sectors are roughly quite even. There's something 150,000 students in universities and a little bit over 140,000 students in the universities of applied sciences. And actually, when you compare those two figures, it's good to remind that the University of Applied Sciences education is a little bit shorter because it's bachelor's degree. So it's roughly the same sizes on the both sectors when it comes to the education. And as mentioned here, most of our population lives actually in the capital area. It's something like 25% that lives on the capital area or near proximity of the capital area. So that's quite natural that many institutions have actually most of the I'm not most, but many institutions actually are located also in the southern part of Finland. I will go quickly about this, so we have good time also the funding and those issues. So our system has been really much based, and our competitiveness of our system have been very much based on the education and innovation. And also this basically tells the same idea in that sense that we do have actually we are still quite high when it comes to the gross domestic expenditure on the research and development, and also when it compares to the size of the country, our percentage working in the research and development issues is quite high on the international comparison. The size of the balls actually reflect quite much the size of the country and size of the research system. So it's quite natural that our ball is, as a small country, it is quite small there, but relative shares are actually still quite high. We were quite much upper on the when it comes to the research and development percentage of gross domestic product, but we are aiming to raise also that percentage. And just a couple of quick words on the issues, which I think actually many will come on the later presentations. For example, you mentioned you are very, very much interested on the internationalization issues that Tina will give much broader review on that issue. But perhaps it is worth to mention here that it has been really long time one of our main issues trying to enhance our internationalization in our higher education system, but also in the all education system. For example, compared to many Nordic countries, we have been basically coming behind of our Swedish neighbors or our Norwegian neighbors. So it has been one of the issues to have more internationalization and these kind of issues in our higher education system. But I think that might be a good point to actually have some questions if you have any on our education system. Then I would go to the funding and steering of the Finnish higher education.
Definitely, and we were advising in the beginning that our guests could write their questions in the chat box, but I think it goes quite naturally also if someone wants to raise up the hand and just pop out the question. But okay, now there's the first question in the chat box.
Yeah, thank you. We can return to this slide, so it might be easier to see at the same time what I'm talking about. It is actually the basic vocational qualification is sufficient to enter into the higher education. there is no need for them to pass to the matriculation exam to enter higher education. They have actually the separate way of doing that. It is they're actually their graduating grades are actually used also from the vocational qualification to enter to higher education. It is higher education institution actually who decide on the criteria to enter to higher education. They are autonomous in that sense. Student intake is actually that's something that they take decisions on. But of course, we discuss a lot with them when we are trying to develop our student intake system. But you can have the basic vocational qualification, use the grades to enter there, but there is also another route than those examinations or those final grades of vocational qualification. There is still a route through the entrance exam. It is possible to route through the entrance exam, though the matriculation examination or the vocational qualification grades are the main route. But still, there are examinations, and also we have been trying to develop different routes to the education also, that you can actually take some courses in the Open University or Open University of Applied Sciences studies and use them as entrance tool to the higher education. But in the end, it's actually the universities and University of Applied Sciences decision how they select our students. But I think actually all use all the basically three routes, using the examination results and degrees, using the entrance exams, and also using some additional routes like the open studies.
Yes. Thank you. And at least I can't see any further questions, so perhaps we can continue.
Yeah, we can go further. So we have some time also to the funding and theory of Finnish higher education system. It's always nice to see that you have spelling error in your in your slide, especially when it's this kind of main slide.
No one else usually notices them but yourself.
Yeah, that's true actually. But it's also funny to see that kind of thing. It's easy to miss something on those headline slides, because you tend not to look those really closely after you have once written them. But I think actually Atte mentioned some of the issues, how we steer, how we have this kind of feedback and monitor our higher education system. But it's actually manifold system. We have this kind of basic legislation, University Act, University of Applied Sciences Act, and also Act for the Academy of Finland, which is our main research council, which gives funding especially to the university's research, basic research funder. And this legislation, it is not in that sense. It gives actually quite broad autonomy to the universities and Universities of Applied Sciences in their operation. They actually choose mainly all the internal operations, how they operate internally. Of course, there are some requirements that they should have this kind of boards or different kind of this kind of issues that actually organs that actually do some set things in the system. But as a ministry, we do not appoint any rectors. We do not appoint any personnel to the universities of Applied Sciences. It's all their own within all their autonomy. Finnish universities were before 2010 as state offices. And at that time they were at the university reform. They were separated from the state, so they are actually the employers of the personnel themselves. Same applies for the universities of Applied Sciences. So they are independent autonomous organizations that which limits are actually set in the legislation. How we do quite a lot of our steering basically of the whole system. We do have performance agreements between the higher education institutions and the ministry. It is mainly on the very strategic level, meaning that actually we agree this kind of, for example, very broader issues like Like, for example, it is included the main development issues of the current government program. For example, we have raised some issues there that there should be more internationalization. We have agreed, for example, on the reform of the student admission processes. That was the prior agreements than which were negotiated last year. This is actually the first year of the new agreements between the higher education institutions and the ministry. And if you happen to be more in detail interested about this, what kind of agreements we have actually translated those in English, those new agreements. A couple of examples: one university applied science and one university. So that's something that I of course can send you as a material, as a background material, if you are interested in this process. Those performance agreements are actually done at the agreement negotiation, which take place between the universities and us in every 4 years. So it's a little bit longer term agreement, because it's not really sensible to agree with the institutions every year. It's those operations in education and research does not change that much. So it's not really sensible. So we have seen that this kind of 4-year period on agreements is actually quite good. And we do have this kind of midterm review after 2 years, where we do not really change the agreements, but we have this kind of small discussion with the institutions, seeing how they are advancing on their targets, basically on which are agreed other agreements. We do not agree really many numeric targets at the agreements. It's mainly on this kind of strategic development points, and how they are going to basically develop their organization, or how they are going to participate in the joint programs. And then we have this funding model. I will return this in more detail in later in my presentation. Steering by information is actually a very big part of our steering. We do discuss very much with our higher education institution. We do meet the rectors of the institutions quite regularly. 2 times a year we have this kind of bigger seminar, but that's not only limited to this. We actually had one of this kind of development program meeting just yesterday, where we're discussing about the future development. We do have many kind of smaller projects, basically based on some single issue type of meetings with the higher education institution. We do meet the vice rectors responsible for the education, vice rectors responsible for the research quite regularly, and discuss about the current issues which are under development on our side and on the institution side. It is very typical actually that we do many kind of development when we establish, for example, some kind of group that working group that aims to enhance or do something with the higher education institution, that they are joint groups with the ministry and with the institution. And when it comes to the monitoring, higher education institutions are actually expected to present the correct information on their performance and on their finances. And most of this data is actually stored in the Vipunen database, which I already sent a link to you, because it is publicly available data to all of the institution, and also to us to use in our monitoring, and also they can use, of course, themselves to see how they compare with their peer institutions. And it is usually monitored and annually monitored through the indicators. It's basically yearly happening data collection. We do it many ways, the data collection. Some of comes from the Statistics Finland, but most of it actually comes from the institutions themselves. We have this kind of joint data warehouse where we can use to get this information and transfer it also to Vipunen database. So this is very much a big part of our system. We do have very good statistical data to back up our system. I will go quite fastly about this so we can check also the funding models themselves. So where we stand, we have very much publicly funded higher education system. The darker blue here is actually the public portion. If it is mostly funded by publicly. There is some private funding for the higher education. It's mostly directed towards research, not so much on the education part. There's some small education parts in also, but it's mostly research funding. So very much publicly funded system, and actually the institutions themselves are quite public. Are all considered public institutions. We don't have this kind of private higher education system in our system. Just for point clarification, our Ministry of Education and Culture is actually the main funder for the universities of applied sciences and for the universities. It comes directly from the ministry, or the major part of the funding. Then there are funding for the Academy of Finland, which is Finnish Research Council, and actually that gives funding mostly to the universities, and it's directed mostly towards basic research. There are some other funders like Business Finland, which is more oriented toward applied research and research quite a lot, mostly actually companies. And of course, we do have under other ministries, we have different kind of government research institutes, like for example, Weather Institute or these kind of institutes that are operating under other ministries as ours. We do have some private foundations and European Union funding that are very important sources also for our system. But how the core funding for higher education institution goes, we do give our universities through the ministry allocated by the funding model is something like 1.7 billion. If you compare this figure to the previous slide, it's a little bit higher there because it's not all allocated through the funding model. This sum is actually what is allocated through the funding model. The other parts which we actually give are something like value added compensations for value added tax paid by the institutions, and there are some other specific project-based funding that is handled outside the model. But this is actually really much the basic rule that we use the model to allocate most part of our funding. For the University of Applied Sciences, the same sum is 830 million, and this actually reflects quite a lot about that the Universities of Applied Sciences are mostly education organizations where the role of research is much smaller. It is there, it's mostly directed towards applied research, but at the universities, it's much bigger the research function compared to Universities of Applied Sciences. And for the universities, our funding forms something like 2/3 of the total funding of the universities. This of course varies quite a lot between the institution, because, for example, Universities of Art is mostly funded by our model, but University of Technologies are somewhere around half funded by our ministry and half coming from the other sources. So it really varies a lot by the institution. And for the University of Applied Sciences, our funding is something like 80% of the total funding. And I mentioned already the other sources. And our funding models are mainly based on output. It's really performance or output-based model, and there is future-oriented strategic funding. Basically, to avoid this kind of too drastic fluctuations between years, we calculate all the indicators using 3 years averages, which gives stability to institutions. And actually, this is the element that kind of operates as kind of basic element, stable basic element in our funding model. So it changes slower than it would if you're using only 1 year data. This means that actually when we calculated funding for the year 2021, it means that most of the averages are 2017 and 2019 because we did the calculation last year. So then the 2019 data was the latest we actually had at that point. So there is basically gap in this calculation of the funding. So yeah, and it's also all is allocated to higher education institution as a lump sum. So actually, they do decide completely how they use it internally and how they allocate it internally. Minus all the project funding Atte already mentioned, there are some small project elements that are actually targeted towards some issue, but this funding, our funding, is given in one sum. How we done this funding model, it was actually this kind of working group, which was really joint working group between the institution, us, and the stakeholders. So this is really cooperative work where this funding model is actually based. We did some changes. This last funding model is not complete overhaul of the old funding model, but it's really long development process. when it comes to the universities, our first performance elements in the funding model appeared already in the 90s. So it has been long in development, and it's gradual development in that sense. For the universities of applied sciences, we did actually a bigger reform in 2014 and 15. It was mainly they were based on the student numbers, and we changed it as a performance-based funding model. So there has been the recent change has been a little bit bigger, but this 2021 reform is actually revision of the older. We did some quite significant changes, but it didn't really change the basic idea of the model anyway. So how our funding system works actually regarding the model. I said in the beginning, in the earlier slide, that there's actually 1.7 billion that is allocated through the model. So it means that the university's model actually 1% means 17 million euros divided between the institutions. And it's actually divided directly on their performance. So for example, if there is some certain number of bachelor's degrees, this 11% is allocated basically directly on the amount of how many bachelor's degrees the university have actually performed. And this actually takes directly into account of the different size of the institutions. We don't need to use any kind of size multipliers because we use directly the degrees allocating our funding. So this is the main part of the education, and it's 30% of the whole model total, the bachelor's degree and master's degree. So it's the biggest part and main indicator here. And here we use actually coefficients, meaning that we give some award of graduating on time. Longer graduates are not left unawarded. It's a smaller multiplier for those who are taking longer times to study, but it's taken in account there. We also have a little bit smaller multiplier for those who are doing their second degree, because it's actually expected that they should have should award the institutions the prior learning already, that it shouldn't be started from the beginning. And I think this is actually the main part on the coefficient, is actually the field of education. We divided all our degrees on 3 different categories, meaning that actually those categories are taken in account in 3 different groups. For example, like trade, this kind of issues are on the, you could say, cheapest class in the degrees, because it's made very much this kind of you can give the same education to a larger group of people at the same time. It doesn't require that much infrastructure. We do have on the second highest class, we do have, for example, most of the technical fields like engineering or this kind of issues, which tend to require, for example, laboratory teaching or this kind of issues. And on the most expensive class, basically, it's smallest of those. We do have degrees like medicine, where it requires both very expensive infrastructure, but it also requires very much this kind of person-to-person given education. So they are both sides in that sense. Also, most of the art education is on the highest class, because it's very special case in that sense. So they are divided in 3 broad categories, and this is actually important. This is part of how we steer our system, that we actually only, regarding master's degrees at universities, give funding up to an agreed target. So we agree the target at the performance agreement negotiations, and it caps the funding, how much you can get from this part of the education. Other important parts, but of course much smaller, are this continuous learning, meaning here is, for example, open university education. We do reward it through the model also, and they can collect small fees from this. It's only 15 euros per ECTS, but it's still a small fee for the open university education. It also includes some more smaller parts of the continuous learning, this part. We do follow the number of employed graduates 1 year after graduation, and also quality of employment. We actually introduced this is new part of our model. We have national this kind of graduate tracking system where we can get data from all the universities. It's survey-based, so universities send surveys to their graduates 5 years after graduation, and we use that data on our funding model. This is done by the universities. This is not our data collection, this graduate tracking. So So they do the actually the data collection, and same applies actually to student feedback, which we use on the model. So it's students are given feedback at the end of in the middle of the studies, basically at the end of the bachelor's degree, and we use that data on some questions of that data. We do not use, of course, all the data. We use that kind of data that actually the institutions can have an effect on. As it comes to the research, its overall size is a little bit smaller than education, and this is due to the fact that there are other funders for the research, especially the Academy of Finland. So research is not funded basically only through our model. There are external sources, public sources also, but for education, this is really the not exactly the only one, but almost the only funding scheme. So it's important to have here the bigger share of the education. This, of course, as I mentioned, doesn't tie the universities anyhow how they divide it internally, but this is our calculation model that divides funding between the institutions. Here, the biggest part is actually the scientific publications, seen as most important issue as kind of output, performance output of the research effect, and they have this kind of federation of learned societies, which actually gives this kind of rating of scientific publications based on the quality. It's done by the scientific community themselves. They rate all the publication channels, and we use that data in our funding model, meaning that when the publication is rated at level 3, it gives significantly actually more funding in our funding model than especially for example the kind of publication that is not referred or at all, or some other publications, or seen as a lower level publication. We do actually reward our institutions for all the external funding they do get, meaning this kind of international competitive research funding is awarded, and also national research funding is awarded in our model. And then there's also PhD degrees that are awarded in the model. Atte already mentioned this at the beginning, that we have this strategic development part, which is agreed partially at the negotiations, and this kind of national education and science policy aims are different kind of programs. One of actually them is a program for the internationalization, but I don't go in any detail on that because I know that Tina will bring that up in more detail, and she's actually have been involved in that part quite a lot, so she can really tell this more in detail what we have been doing in this sense. But actually, when I sent you the performance agreements, you can see what we have been agreeing on that issue on there also. And it's divided in two parts, where the actual university's own strategy is actually the bigger part of that. And when we have also this element of national duties, which are agreed on the 4-year period, they are actually far more stable than only for 4-year periods, but it's agreed 4 years at one time. For example, National Library of Finland operates under the University of Helsinki. It has to be somehow separately taken into account in the system. And also University of Arts is something that we need to take account here, because they do not really get that much funding to the research part. Their operation is a little bit different, so we have to take some exceptions taken account in here. For the University of Applied Sciences, its basic principle is exactly the same. This is and here it's 1% means that something 8 million euros divided between the institutions. But education plays here a much bigger role because it plays so much bigger role in the operation of the institutions themselves. Bachelor's degrees is actually half of the model. And this is same principle, basic idea. We have 3 groups of education, 3 groups of fields in the education, which are divided by different multipliers. And funding is given also here up to agreed targets. In many cases, actually, the targets are way higher. That it's not really expected that they would actually be limited by the target. But there are some fields that it has proven to be quite important. For example, in art education or this kind of issues where the labor market demand has been a little small, cultural areas. So that can be used as steering the system in some directions. Continuous learning is important part here. We use also here number of employed graduates, also quality of employment in a very similar way than in the universities. It graduates tracking is based on survey, and number of employed graduates is based on the administrative data 1 year after graduation. They do have also this kind of student feedback system which we use, and this is one of the specialties in the University of Applied Sciences, that they do award, 5 of them actually give degrees in vocational teacher training, so it's awarded through the model that task also. There is a little bit less than 20% part of research and development. We have been trying quite a long time actually to enhance this also, and this has been something that is risen a bit in the model, this part of research and development. External research and development funding is also awarded here. Master's degrees, small part, and also publications are a very small part here, because the publication is not that much this kind of priority for this kind of research, that can refer to publications as it is on the university side. So it's a much smaller part of the model. And also we have this kind of basic strategic funding also here. Part of it is much smaller than in the universities, but it still exists and used in very, very, very same way than in the universities. So basically, my presentation here, I'm sorry that I think I actually a little bit talked a little bit too long, but this is something that is a little bit hard to explain really shortly.
This is all good, and we are well in schedule, and there are actually a few questions that we thought it would be interesting if you could answer them. We definitely have time for those 2 questions. First, there is the question from Damar. It's visible for you, right? So perhaps if you just go ahead and read it and answer.
I think actually, I think this is the first one. The methodology behind the appointing shares to each pillar. This is something that actually basically comes from the long-term history. So if you see, for example, for the universities part, it might be easier to show in this slide. As the prior model, it's something that has been quite stable through the history, that share of the education has been roughly around 40% for quite a long time already. I think it might have changed 1% on the way or another. So it was really small adjustment, and this has been determined already a long time ago that it should be around there to reflect the sizes of the basically the needs of the system in that sense. So it's changed really, really, really slowly, this issue. And I think actually we did for the research we did same kind of change, that I think it rose by 1% and in the model, because we actually raised the part of the scientific publication. So these pillar changes have been really small, and basically I think there are quite a good consensus that they reflect quite closely and quite well the actual need of the system, and that combined with the other funding elements like the Academy of Finland, that would give roughly that 50-50 state between the education and research, with it quite close to what the institutions, actually universities, do. Research is a little bit more prominent, but it's not that much. So that's the basic idea on that. But we discussed actually this also with the working group between the universities, with the higher education institutions and stakeholders. We started this and discussed whether they are okay, and everybody seemed to be quite content on this. So there was only small changes. So we didn't do any radical issues, but when it comes to the indicators, for example, bachelor's degrees and master's degrees, it has been quite a long time, of course, the main element, because degrees are the main, you can say, main output that we can measure, and it's very transparent to measure. And also it's quite fair indicator for the institutions. It has been quite long, the biggest one on there, but we did some changes in this, and it was done in the working group in very cooperative way. We discussed each percentage, so whether it was okay, did some adjustment there, and then actually when the working group was finished, then it goes to the political process where the government, mostly it's actually ministry's decision or government's decision. It's not really on the law level decisions when it comes to the percentages. So actually it was, in the end, it was the government who decided on the models, but because it was unanimous working group report that suggested this kind of percentage. All the changes on the political process were very small in that sense. That's been quite typical because it's broad cooperation between the institutions. So it's usually the changes in political processes is quite small. There are some adjustments done, of course. It's quite natural, and of course because it's government's decision. In the end, there's a possibility of this, but it's long work and very much cooperative work when how we end up between the end up to different shares in the model. How we are higher education's role in setting the goals and performance indicators receiving core funding. When we agree on in the target indicators, for example, master's degrees, it's actually also very cooperative process, and most of it's done before the actual performance agreements negotiations. We do not anymore at the actual negotiation table do not really discuss on the targets. Usually there might be some exceptions, but not usually. It's done already before that. We have this kind of it's actually quite old already, but still serves its function very well. This kind of quota performance agreements system where universities send their first succession to how many degrees they would like to have in their agreements to us, and we review that. We see that whether it's okay. And actually, I forgot to mention that actually we first send this kind of guidance letter to institutions where we set the overall target for the whole sector, meaning that it might be something like 16,000 master's degree in total. I can't remember what was the actual figure in the last guidance letter, but you get the idea on that we sent the overall targets, our target for the whole sector, and then they can give their own idea how many they would to give on the different fields on the education. Its fields are actually grouped in these purposes for a little bit broader than the normal field of education. I think for the universities there are some 8 or 9 groups of fields which are they suggest that some target for the master's degree how many they could give. And actually this process can be repeated as many times as needed to end up in the consensus of how many degrees they should end up doing. And in the end, we do usually get, for the most degrees, we get quite soon actually get good agreement on those. We of course look at how many they have actually awarded on the last years, how many students they have inside studying that, so we don't accept any really unrealistic targets. If there are more degrees, they want more degrees that there are students inside the institution, that would not be really really useful target, but it also comes for the future. So we are trying to have more degrees, so the targets are quite high at the moment. So there will be a lot of work for the institutions actually to get to the targets now. So that's the process, and in the end it goes like that. When we have used the system, agreed the targets there, when there are some disagreements with the institutions, it's in the end it's our director general who calls the director of the institution, and they discuss it before the negotiations. So we try to agree all the targets before the negotiations. That's because we want to use the actual negotiations when all are on the same table to discuss about the strategic choices, where the university wants to go. That's the main issue there, and trying to be on the same level, and how we can support it, and how we can and how the university can support the national aim. So that's the idea of discussion, not to discuss on the degree. So it's useful to agree this all beforehand. Really, who are the stakeholders who take part in the setting performance targets? Well, actually, there are no really that's directly stakeholders involved. It's agreeing the targets is something that's done between the institution and the ministry, but of course, in the board of the universities, there are external members, which are usually actually the stakeholders of the area, like municipalities or the businesses of the area, or some kind of this kind of stakeholders that are very much involved in the process, because of course the board at the university is something that takes also the view, strategic view on for example, on the targets or performance agreements. But it's really this process is done between the institutions and the ministry. There is also very much of the different kind of background processes which we use to set up the targets. We have this kind of quite actually already quite long-standing and I forgot the words, foresight process actually, which give us kind of estimates for the future needs of the degrees. It's actually run by the National Board of Education that quite a lot that gives us general idea that how many degrees we need on some broader levels on the future. So this data is also used very much in this process, and in this sense the stakeholders are of course involved in that, but the actual discussion happens between us and the institution. Yeah, let's imagine a new university is being established. That's actually an interesting question, and I think if something like this happens, considering the current model, we would really need to have some really long discussions how it would be actually used in this, because I think the last universities, I don't know when it actually, somewhere in the 90s, might have been established. So nothing like this has not really happened in the basically during the current model. Actually, the Finnish universities are written in the law. So if a new university would come, it would require law change. So it would be anyhow quite long process, and it would be needed to solve out basically separately. I would imagine that if actually the parliament would make that kind of decision that the new university would be established, they would also provide funding for that purposes. That would be my guess, but there is no really any kind of happenings that could give any indication on that, but that really would be my guess on that sense. We have mostly had actually different kind of mergers of the universities. In 2009 or something, we had 20 universities. Now we have 13. And for the University of Applied Sciences, the number was in early 2000 something, 35, and now we are 23. So the direction of the system has been more like that, not to establish new universities. Universities of applied sciences are actually government's decision. So government could decide to give new operating permit for the University of Applied Sciences, but that's also something that hasn't happened in really long time. So would need also to be solved separately. Okay, what are the instruments for collecting student feedback and quality of employment graduates? Yeah, it's actually the universities and University of Applied Sciences have both have this kind of networks that actually do this. It's their own networks. Ministry doesn't have really anything to do with that. That are actually operating those surveys. It's a university and University of Applied Science themselves who send the actual survey to their students. So they send it by email. They might send it also by mail if they do not have someone's address, for example, when it comes to the graduate who has graduated 5 years back. But it's universities who do the actual data collection, and it's the network of the universities who do the collating of the data. We use actually Center for CSCs. We have this kind of company owned by the ministry and the institutions. It's public company whose main task is actually do this kind of scientific calculation. For example, they run the supercomputers and these kind of issues, but they also run different kind of joint services, and this is one of them. They use their data collecting tool to collect the actual data for the graduate tracking and the student feedback. But it's these are institutions who send the questionnaires to the students using that CSC tool for that. We actually are only the data users, and we do not use at all the data. We have selected some questions from the graduate tracking and some questions from the student feedback that we use on the funding model. Of course, we can look all the performance in any of those indicators. It's also they also can be found on the Vipunen database, but we use something like 10 questions or something like that. There are questions that, for example, like that, how satisfied the student was for the instruction given, or how relevant the studies for their employment. These kind of questions that are relevant in that sense. So that is our instrument, how we collect the data on that.
Yes,
Yeah,
thank
thank
you, Tommy. I believe that is, if I'm right, you have successfully answered all the questions on the chat box, and really a big thank you for this presentation and having time for all these questions. And I believe that you brought an excellent overview on the funding and steering system of the Finnish higher education. And we really value for you for giving your time and sharing this knowledge and insights today with us and with the Georgian guests. And as we can see, nothing else but thank you notes in the chat box. We wish you a very sunny Tuesday, and thank you once more for being present today in this workshop. Thank you,
Yeah,
Tommy.
thank you very much. And I will send, for example, to Sini and Sofia, through you the agreements, and it might be worthwhile also to mention, if you are interested in legislation, we do have translations on our University Act and University of Applied Sciences Act. They can be found on the web page. Unfortunately, they are a couple of years old. The translation to English is actually in the process now, and it should be ready in let's say a month or so. The more recent translation, but the basic principle is still the same. So if you are interested, I can send also link to those, so you can see what kind of issues are set in our University Acts in translation.
Yes, that's a very good addition. Definitely, I think we can collect a set of useful links that come up throughout the workshop and add them afterwards and send them to all the participants. Good idea. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Okay, good. Bye for Tommy then. And next up in the program, it would be Counselor of Education Juha Ketolainen from EduFi. And Juha will be telling you about the internationalization of Finnish higher education. And as said in the beginning, Juha will let you know about the journey and the most important steps that have been taken along the years in a process to internationalize Finnish higher education. And there are surely many people in Finland who could give you this kind of an overview, but Juha definitely is one of the best persons to do this, as he has made a long and interesting career in internationalization of higher education, starting on a university level, moving then on to CIMO, the Center of International Mobility and Cooperation, and then after the merger of CIMO and the National Board of Education to EduFi, where Juha currently keeps on advancing the internationalization of education for all the education sectors. But this in short, and I will next then give the floor to Juha. Go ahead.
Thank you so much, Sofia, and ladies and gentlemen, dear guests. It's a great pleasure for me to address such a high-level delegation. As nowadays, always I have to ask in the beginning, can you hear me? Can you see my presentation? Is it okay?
Both and it's okay.
Okay, thank you so much. So let's move forward, and my presentation will be a little bit different from those of the colleagues from the ministry. Now you have a very good basic understanding of the Finnish higher education and research world and the national priorities and how the system is structured. My presentation is about internationalization of higher education, not so much on research, but higher education. And it will be observations, central observations on what has happened during the last 30 years. And it will not cover every aspect, not at all, but some major observations that I think that could be of interest for you. And I come as my colleague Sofia explained from the National Agency for Education, EduFi, and I will only say 2 words about it. It's an agency that has as a task the development of education. We are working under the Ministry of Education and Culture, and we are more of the implementation type of organization. And our second main task is to promote internationalization. and that's the part where we, I and my colleagues work. You have the details about our organization, and that when it comes to internationalization, we do work in all sectors of education, also in youth and cultural field. It is our task to be the national agency for many nationally funded initiatives and programs, but we are also the Erasmus Plus agency for the European Union education and mobility programs, national agency also for Nordic programs, Nord Plus you might have heard, and we are also carrying out different programs and initiatives funded by our Ministry for Foreign Affairs, mainly for development cooperation aims in higher education mainly. And we do provide information on opportunities for internationalization in Finland, but also we promote Finnish education and training abroad. And in all our actions, I think as a national agency, it's a guiding principle for us to have a very close cooperation with the higher education institutions in our country. And that is something that I would like to stress from the very beginning. And of course, when I speak about development of education, it's mainly in the other sectors of education. Higher education institutions have their autonomy, of course, in our country. Well, let's move on, and I wanted to share some observations with you during the last 30 years. Of course, we can agree that there is no higher education, high quality higher education without an international dimension. This has been the case always. But I think that the 1990s, the early 1990s, meant a change in internationalization. And of course, there were these big changes in the international environment in Europe and globally as a background. The Berlin Wall was not there anymore. The Soviet Union collapsed. We had perestroika developments. We had the integration of Western Europe, and all this meant that a country like Finland, which was perhaps not isolated, but let's say quite far away from the main European and global centers, and realized that we have to open up, and the world is changing. The economies are working more closely together, and there is there was then of course the kind of understanding that or recognized need for new competencies, that our students must have competencies that they can survive in this changing world. And this has had an impact on how internationalization and students and study programs were thought. And internationalization, and especially student mobility, became important in the early 1990s. There were different policies, working groups from the government level, and a kind of a famous aim, first aim, national aim set by our minister Christopher Taxell at that time was to send 5,000 Finnish exchange students annually abroad. There was not so much talk in the beginning about students and teachers coming from abroad to Finland, because at that time the thinking was more that we have to send our own students and own teachers, and perhaps not so many would come to our country was the thinking at that time. And it all started through pilot mobility schemes between Finnish universities and universities in 3 selected countries: UK, Germany, France. and these pilot schemes included mainly student mobility, but also teacher mobility, and they were funded by our own ministry. I was myself at that time at Helsinki University of Technology, and we were developing these pilot schemes with the UK, Germany, and France. And this served as a background for joining the Erasmus Program, which became the European Union, the European Communities program Erasmus, which at that time was only a program for higher education, became soon a main tool for internationalization of Finnish higher education, and especially student mobility. Finland joined in 92, 93, and then there were also other programs opening up at the same time, the Nordic North Plus program, and then these bilateral exchanges were further developed between universities in different countries. But it was Erasmus that became a success story immediately, and there were many reasons behind this. Of course, the national student aid plays an important role here. The Finnish students are eligible for national student aid, which they can take with them when they go abroad as an exchange student, or if they study for a degree, they have the same kind of support than the national, those students that study in the country. In the grant policies that we had in our country, we always had the aim to give a grant to as many students as possible. It was possible to make a selection whether you give big grants for fewer students or whether you give smaller grants for more students. And we always chose the latter one. As many students as possible should get a grant. And of course, the national student aid system helped here because it was available also for all students. Then from the very beginning, it was important to develop the teaching in English, study programs in English to attract exchange students and teachers from other countries. And at that time, I must say, there were also a limited number of programs run in French or German. But nowadays we have the situation where this has disappeared. English is dominating. And also the students' knowledge of languages is more limited to English, I would say. From the very beginning, a central part of development was the importance of supporting teacher exchanges. We saw it many times how things went in a good into a good direction through teacher exchanges. So the teachers play an important role. In Finland, I think the proportion of teacher exchanges from our universities was very high compared to other European countries from the very beginning. So we sent very actively teachers abroad, and we very actively also received teachers from other countries. And that had as a consequence better possibilities for student mobility, but also all kind of other joint efforts in higher education and also research. Then I would say the proactive role of the national agency has played a very big role here in Finland, encouraging and supporting the universities to increase their international activities. And as the guiding principle, I mentioned that we try to have a very close cooperation with our higher education institutions. As far as student mobility is concerned, it has been from the very beginning a very important issue to pay attention to four basic things, four success factors. It's to us maybe self-evident, but still, if these four are working well, then it makes life much much easier. Academic recognition, has been an issue from the 1990s, and it is still an issue, and it has to be guaranteed. Otherwise, you can't have more mobility. Linguistic preparation of the students, that's of course important. Orientation before and after the mobility period is something that I think is of high level in Finland, that we support our students in orientation, in giving advice, in preparing them for the study abroad period, but also taking care of them afterwards, and also taking care that the knowledge that they have gathered also, which is relevant for the universities, is also gathered. And then, as a practical matter, accommodation arrangements. This is, of course, of central importance. If the emphasis was on student mobility in the beginning, then it soon appeared that other forms of cooperation were rapidly developing. And when the first kind of cooperation was more from the department level, from the professors to professors in other countries in their subject area, then it moved a little bit more into a more centralized way of cooperation, where the higher education institutions started to draft their own internationalization strategies, and the cooperation was based on these strategies. And this is now commonplace. Every higher education institution, they have either their own separate higher internationalization strategy, or internationalization is very often nowadays also included in the general strategy of the higher education institution. But in the beginning, it was very common that universities had their own separate strategies for internationalization. And the cooperation forms are also much more varied nowadays, of course, and started to be so in the 90s already. Intensive courses, curriculum development, and then joint programs, joint degrees. And this also showed that the cooperation was based on more strategic thinking. And the cooperation partners became more and more. First, it was maybe the neighboring countries, the European countries, but then the partner countries of the European Union, and then globally also. But still, Finnish higher education and its internationalization, it's quite much concentrated on Europe. Well, some central guidelines, policies, thinking behind the development from the 90s until today. I think it's clear that in the 1990s we were more thinking about cooperation and capacity building, and sending our own students abroad, so that and also making the own higher education institution more competitive. And it has been moving from this thinking more towards attracting highly skilled people to the country, reinforcing the knowledge economy of the country. So a kind of a shift, if we talk about mobility, it has been a shift from exchange students a little bit more to the degree students also, international degree students, and recruiting international degree students. At national level, we are talking more about country branding nowadays, presence abroad. Alumni activities deserve more attention nowadays than in the 90s. In Finland, there were no student fees in the 90s and in the early 2000, but some years we already have student fees for international students coming from outside the European area. And then also experts linked to educational know-how have been discussed and are implemented more nowadays. Then how the world has changed has had an impact on what is being a priority. In 2011 or around those times, we had the financial crisis, and this has as a consequence that more emphasis was put on the job market and the employability of students. And in our programs and in Erasmus program also, more emphasis was put on trainee exchanges and pilot projects between universities and companies. In recent, I would say maybe 15 years, we have had more and more attention paid to global responsibility, to sustainable development, to Agenda 2030. And this has had as a consequence programs and funding from the development cooperation funds, for example, and also more attention paid to higher education for immigrants, that we should have, which we should offer them a possibility and take advantage also of their knowledge and competencies. And scholar rescue funds and other support measures for researchers and students in crisis areas in the world, they should be helped and their competencies also taken on board. Inclusion, equity in internationalization, that has been an issue for many years also in Finland. When we try to bring the internationalization to every student, every teacher, we have to think about these things as well. And this is happening also at the European level, and it very well suits into the Finnish thinking, because equity is a kind of a general cornerstone principle in Finnish education. I will go rather quickly forward and only touch some of these issues that I have mentioned here. I see that time is running. And now, of course, it's the pandemic and the consequences that we have when we come out of it. What kind of cooperation will be supported? What are the changes? I think if I mention shortly some things, short-term mobility seems to be increasing, also regardless of the pandemic. But anyway, virtual cooperation, blended mobility arrangements, these we are discussing very much with our universities at the moment, and universities of applied science, of course, also. And it seems that there is still need for more strategic cooperation between universities. A fine example is the European Universities initiatives that the European Commission is supporting, and which means that the cooperation in these university networks is closed, much closer than earlier. So it's an example of that strategic close cooperation. I have here a classification of different strategies by the OECD that may be interesting to you. I will not go into details, but I think it shows different arguments and different positions also that are used all the time, but in different proportions. And I think there is a a greater movement from the 1990s until today, from a more kind of an cooperation, mutual understanding, kind of capacity building measures to more economically based thinking, so that maybe it shows and helps how the shift has been during the past 30 years. But then I wanted to share a couple of words on the benefits. Of course, the basic question when we speak about internationalization is that why do we do this? And I think it's clear that we have benefits for the individual, we have benefits for the higher education institution level, and some of them are clear, but some of them deserve a little bit thinking. For the individual, of course, personal growth, language, communication skills, networks, better competencies, and such things are important. I've listed some of them here, but I would also like to draw your attention to the hidden competencies link that I have mentioned there. Some years ago, we at the national agency made a large survey with employers trying to find out that what kind of competencies the employers value, and it became clear in this large study that the employers would like to see such competencies that are gained exactly through internationalization. They can be in broad sense be described like productivity, curiosity, or resilience. Such things that the employers try to look at when they recruit people. And this is a very strong message, I think, for internationalization and for the individuals also. If you want to try to find a good job and have success in your career, internationalization might help. The world is such today. And the link is Sofia, I see that has put it in the chat, but it's also in my presentation. And the benefits for the institution, I've listed some. There are, of course, benefits for the national level. For a country like Finland, depending on foreign trade, for example, the economic rationale is very strong, but it's not only economical, it's much more than that. But I will not go into that more in detail, not at the moment due to lack of time. Some statistics I wanted to share with you, showing the developments of international mobility periods of higher education students from and to Finland. From the 1990s, we had a very rapid growth in both outgoing and incoming students. But as you see here, during the last 5 years, or from 2016 onwards, the outgoing number of Finnish students started to go down a little bit. I think it had many reasons, many domestic reasons. Students were asked to in many ways to graduate in time and find a job, so they had not so much time to go abroad. We have tried to pay attention to these reasons, and maybe later on my colleagues can explain more about this. We've made studies and projects with the higher education institutions about this matter. And then, of course, it's the pandemic that has now been the reason for the numbers to go down rapidly, and we don't know, of course, exactly how much it takes time to be recovered, the situation. For the channels, the mobility programs, we have very good statistics in Finland. I think in this respect it covers all university and University of Applied Sciences students. You see that the share of the European Erasmus Plus program is very large and has been even growing. And then there are the other ways of internationalization mentioned here. Also, the institutions have their own bilateral agreements. It's not a small proportion of the whole thing. And the countries which are in this respect top 5 destination or sending countries, you can see here European countries. Of course, the Erasmus program offers funding, and it's also seen here. What has been a change from the 1990s is the UK. I think UK was on the top for quite a long time, number 1 or number 2 at least as a destination country, but nowadays, Brexit or not Brexit, they are not among the 5 top countries. Female students are more active than male. This is the situation in our country at least. It depends also a little bit on the subject areas. And then I have, this is my 3 last slides, some statistics on degree students to and from Finland. If we take the perspective of 30 years, the outgoing number of Finnish students, so students who go abroad to take the whole degree abroad at a foreign university, that was very stable at between 4,000 and 5,000 students annually. But then after 2010, it started to grow, and it's more than doubled since. This shows that the Bologna process is working, but also I think it shows that the students' thinking has been changing, and the world has been changing. So they are more eager to take the whole degree abroad. 9,000 out of about 300,000 degree students, domestic degree students, or degree students at Finnish higher education institutions in total. And also, as I mentioned earlier, more attention has been put into recruiting foreign degree students, and their number was over 21,000 a couple of years ago. According to the latest statistics, it's a bit less than 20,000, or around 20,000. And of course, the pandemic may change the situation for some time at least. And compared to the total number of students, you see there the percentages. And here still to give 2 more ideas, mobility of degree students by continent. As I explained already, the Finnish students tend to go to Europe, and the international degree students who come to Finland come from Europe, but also increasingly from Asia. And if we look at the countries, it's quite interesting. For a very long time, the 3 top countries have been for Finnish students, Sweden, United Kingdom, and Estonia. Germany used to be also quite popular, but maybe Finnish students don't know so much German anymore. The Netherlands, which offers a lot of courses in English, has overtaken Germany there. United States is also one of the top 5 countries, but quite far away after Sweden, United Kingdom, and Estonia. And instead, or a different picture when you look at the degree students who come to Finland, they're the number 2 or 3 top countries are Vietnam, Russia, and China. Nepal has been on the increase. China used to be for a long time #1, but now a number of Chinese students has gone a little bit down. Russia has been very important. The number of Russian students was 3,000 at its best, I think. And Vietnam, there are very many links between Finnish higher education institutions, Vietnamese also, and Vietnamese universities. Vietnam is also a target country for Finnish developing aid, and then the students themselves are very active. So there are some reasons for the rapid increase the number of Vietnamese students in Finland. Okay, I think I've missed my time by 5 minutes, and I will stop now and be of course here happy to answer 1 or 2 questions, but I hope that I didn't mess up with your timetables, but I had to start a little bit later. Thank you so much.
Indeed. Thank you, Juha. The case was that, as you said, that you could start a bit later than planned, so you are well in time, and we have reserved 1.5 hours for lunchtime, which is approaching next, so there is no problem at all, even if we go a bit over time right now. So thank you very much for this interesting and very thorough presentation. And I was actually thinking when you were going through it that this is and would be a good introduction to any new colleague, for example, at EduFi or in the higher education institutions, starting up with the career with internationalization of higher education. So perhaps this is something that we also at EduFi can keep in mind and share this presentation afterwards. But now, as said, there would be time for a few questions if there are any from our Georgian audience. So far, I can see no typing questions. Now there is one from Irina.
Yes, it's about programs that are mainly popular among incoming degree students as funding programs. Most of them come through Erasmus, but if we speak about study programs, then it's a wide range of programs at this time, and Finland is known in some subject areas better than others, but maybe I think maybe the latest figures, Sofia or Sini, you might even know better than me what to say. Which study programs are. It's of course those big programs that are popular everywhere, like business and engineering also. But there are quite many traditionally arts students coming to Finland, technology, all technology programs as also, and great interest towards Finnish educational science. But maybe Sofia, Sini, you might add something to that.
I must admit that my answer would have been very similar to Juha's, and I don't know if Sini has the very update knowledge on this, but if not, we can definitely look into the statistics and provide you the proportion of each study program and their popularity when it comes to incoming degree students. But I don't know if Sini, if you can comment more in detail, then please do so. Yes.
I would suggest adding this detailed information also in the materials that we then provide afterwards.
But I would like to point out that nowadays, or for a long time already, Finnish universities and universities of applied sciences are offering a very large number, internationally compared, a large number of study programs in English in all fields, and this is makes it possible for almost all study programs to be attractive also for international students.
Definitely so, yes. But we will come back to this after the workshop. And yes, I can see no further questions in the chat box, but we can also think of some additional other information that might be interesting for you. For example, Juha was mentioning this the declining mobility figures when it comes to outgoing student mobilities from Finland, and we have published also articles on this and on our national analysis in English. So we could, if you are interested, we can add this type of information to the material as well. There is now one question on the accommodation arrangements for international students. Do you want to start off, Juha, with answering?
Yes. Maybe here I would say that this is an area where the government does perhaps not play such a big role. It's the universities and the local administrations in the cities that try to find solutions. And I think we in general in Finland have a quite a good accommodation system for students, but it varies, of course, a little bit according to the cities what the situation is like. But the government is backing, of course, the efforts, but I would say that it's always a local solutions. How could you add something to this, maybe, Sofia and Sini?
Yeah, well, just like Juha said, I mean, the student housing system, there is this, could we call it the student housing association in almost any city with higher education institutions, and usually the operating model has been the type that together with the city or municipality and the higher education institutions in the area, together, like Juha said, they are kind of making this plan where they reserve a certain amount of apartments and accommodations for incoming international students. And by this way, they are kind of ensuring that the incoming international students have access to inexpensive student housing also.
And then there are, of course, the private housing markets also, but they play not such a big role here in Finland than in some other countries.
Yes, but for now there are no more further questions, and yes, this was very, very interesting, Juha, and we are so happy that you could take the time and come to this morning sessions, to this workshop with us, and we will definitely provide all this additional material and links as promised. And for Juha, we hope that you also will have a good sunny Tuesday and the rest of the working day and weekend. See you around, and thank you very much.
Thank you so much, and thank you for making it possible to be here. And I wish that also the links between Georgian and Finnish universities will be reinforced after our efforts. Have a nice day.
Thank you. Bye, Juha. And yes, I don't know, Sini, if you could help me out and share the slide with the program for the afternoon. I'm trying to share it, but now I see that I don't have it in my slide selection for some reasons. But anyways, in the program where we are approaching now is that we will have a lunch break, and we will come back in Finnish time at 1 o'clock. And what we will be having in the program then is the session number 2, and in session 2 we will then get to the actual core issue of this workshop, and that is the strategy and policies to promote internationalization in Finnish higher education. And we will have a good 2-hour-long session coming up with our colleague Tiina Vihma-Purovaara from the Ministry of Education and Culture